And then I guess we're at the part that you know, a lot of people like this part of the meeting the most. You know, your chance to spend the remainder, which is about an hour. You know, up to, I guess, about an hour. We'll see how it goes. Sometimes there's a ton of questions. We got some of these questions before the event, so we paste them here, and we'll kind of talk about them a little bit, and then we'll drop into sort of the normal think about your questions, and you can put them in the chat, and we'll go through them. So I guess on the first one, right, please cover how to properly set up TeamViewer, and also about the web admin. Well, what you've seen from earlier slides is we actually have step-by-step for TeamViewer for every platform. We have that in the Foundry. So I don't necessarily want to tie up, you know, the AMA for that, because the content over there really is great. And what I would say is, go watch the asker of this, or anyone that's curious, go watch the videos in the Foundry on TeamViewer. And then if you had questions, if you go over to the Alliance forums, right, you'll either see a response from me or from another customer that knows the answer. You know, you'll be able to easily interact. And if it's a support question, obviously open a ticket with support. But otherwise, you could very quickly get what you need. Web admin is the same. We have the web admin webinar in the Foundry. I'd say the same thing. Review that. It was very good and detailed in about 2 hours. And then use the Alliance forums for some follow-up questions. Or if you have professional services, you know, feel free to reach out to the person you're working with. On the zero-touch deployment, I think, Tony, you had some ideas about that when we were chatting about this
you're
earlier.
doing fine. You're doing fine. Just keep going. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, on the zero-touch deployment, it does, of course, depend on what platform we're talking about and what the capabilities are on the platform. I'm guessing maybe you're talking Apple on this front. There are a few things that we're looking at here. Of course, DEP on the Apple side drives, you know, the beginning of that process, at least. We highly recommend a couple of things there to really help. You can look at a phased deployment where you're doing kind of a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 kind of thing. And API calls actually can come in really handy there. If you're dealing with, say, Windows or Mac, you can use the API to drive phased onboarding, so you can maybe prioritize content of what you want to get to folks first. There's some things you can do there. But it really does kind of depend on what we're looking to do. The use of placeholders is also very useful if you're dealing with actual new gear, that you can set things up ahead of time and just have it match up based on name and kind of pre-deploy content. I'm an honest guy, so I'll tell you where I also feel that we're a little weak. We're a little weak on notification to the user during that process, right? So that's one of the areas in the product that we'd really like to work on. I'll go ahead and answer the next one too. So we had a question about rollout plans, and that may be kind of a little hidden little gem that's in FileWave Anywhere that you may not have noticed. So there, on software updates, there's an ability to define a time for installation. Now, it's not as granular as we'd like it to be, and it was always intended to be applied to anything, not just software updates, but they allow you to say, hey, just after business hours, or hey, this can only be installed on weekends. We'd really like to push that a little bit forward too on the product side. But right now, it's only software updates and not for when you click the button that says, hey, associate it to all devices.
And then, you know, for macOS Ventura, right, are there any changes in updating or creating third-party file sets? Really, I would say that Big Sur, Monterey, and Ventura are very similar, right? The only thing I'd say to think about is that if you have a file set to only go to specific versions of macOS and you don't have the thing checked to say deploy on newer versions, well, then Ventura won't be checked, you know, necessarily. So you'll want to go and look at your file sets that you are limiting to certain versions. And if you know that that file set should work on Ventura, you could change the requirements for the file set. But otherwise, and I guess as related to third party, make sure that software does work on Ventura, because I'll think of like Cocktail for the Mac, right? They always make a new version of Cocktail for every version of Mac OS. So you want to think about, if that's the case, but otherwise it really is the same. There's some new profiles. If you look at our release notes for 14.9, there are some new changes to profiles for Ventura, so you can do those additional things that Apple's given us to be able to add.
And I'll mention on that one as well, Josh, there have been some questions around MDM software updates for taking a device to the newest version of the OS. Major versions of the OS are not supported through that MDM update command, but it's a little gray area. So we're working on that now and talking to Apple and trying to understand that, because it's kind of surprised us that all of a sudden we had major upgrades showing in that list. So just know for now you can't do it, but we're working with Apple to understand why they're showing up in the list. When the responses on that, or if you try, it says, oh, you can't do the major upgrade. So we're looking at that as well.
If I can just chime in there. It looks like this is something which was not available at the very beginning of MDM software update, and which has been added by Apple. We have asked them to clarify the documentation. There is one item which allows to define how the update should be installed. And if you are now using FileWave, you will see that it will just complain that the installation command is not supported by the update. It's a very gray area, as Tony mentioned, but it looks like there will be a way. So we are working on it, and hopefully we will be able to do it in a future version.
And further comment on that, although not directly on this topic, I just want to thank those of you who actually submitted questions ahead of time, because as anybody that's watching the chat can see, having some questions in here really kind of tickles everybody's thinking cap a little bit, and so we get so many questions in the chat. So Josh, we got a whole slew of things queued up for after we go through this list.
Okay, so then let's the stacking of installs on Kiosk, right? Obviously, it makes sense that if you have something in Kiosk, they want to be able to perhaps pick 3 things and say, I want these 3 things to install, right? And one of them needs a reboot. But the way it would be today, you'd click the first thing would do a reboot, then you'd come back to Kiosk and pick the second thing you want, right? And so this was something you and I talked about, Tony, right? And I believe the answer is that there isn't necessarily a way today to do this, but Product Board would be the way to send an idea like this so that it might be considered. Because in UI, it would be possible, if we put some development to it, to create like a, you could multi-select things and then say install all 3 of these things.
Yeah,
right?
It's a funny question, actually, because when you look at the requests that we've gotten that are about current feature sets, things that we do today, there are 2 topics, as I mentioned, that just kind of boil to the top and that we get the most requests for, and it's reboots and it's kiosk. Those are the 2 topics, and this question combines both of them together. So it's a very good one. We partially have, I think, that request. There's a couple of things you can do today. You, of course, can put multiple payloads or file sets together in a payload group or a file set group. So you could publish that way, but that means that you have to know ahead of time what kind of things people will want to group together, and you may very well not be able to do that. So that may be helpful or not. But yeah, please do give us feedback in Product Board and that if you've got like, hey, here's my, and what's really helpful, be as verbose as you like. We need this because I want to publish A and B and C, and A requires a reboot, but A needs to be installed. Anything, the more detail you can give us, the better, because it's the user stories, it's the use cases that help us so much in determining how valuable that request might be to other folks as well.
Okay. And then I guess that feeds into kind of the last question on this slide was, that there are MDM controls not present in FileWave. Will this be expanded upon? And the answer we talked about and with PN and was, that basically we add the obvious things, right? The things that are obvious to us, right? They just get added. You'll see in 14.9, there are some additional profiles, right? And we know there's new things that come out. And some of them we say, aha, this is a perfect fit for FileWave, we add it. There are others that may just take us more time, right? But we still know they're important. And so you'll see them show up in 14.10 or 14.11. And then there's others where we're not quite sure that it's worthwhile, but the feedback through product board could clue us into, maybe we're wrong. And the thing really is helpful to people because you gave us your perspective about why that thing was really important.
Well, I mean, full disclosure on this one, Josh and I discussed this yesterday, and it was number 1 on the list. And we said, hey, let's put this at number 6 on the list because we know that PN has another appointment and he might not be there early enough. So we put this one last so that PN could be here when we answered this question. But I know some things like lights out management for Mac Minis, for instance, we purposely didn't do because our product does it. So we said, you know what, that one's really not terribly important to us. At least that was our interpretation, as Josh said. But please do, if you say, hey, I know you guys could do this, but you're not doing it, please let us know through product board. And PN, if you want to chime in there with anything, feel free.
I mean, definitely, when Apple is sharing all the new features, usually in June, WWDC, we have very short nights, especially here in Europe, because time zone difference and watching all the stuff from California. And yeah, we build a list of everything, and you know that Apple is quite good at disclosing items, not the first day, but it took weeks, if not months, to have updates in documentation. So we have to choose, we have to focus, and we focus on what we think is the most important. And again, I can only repeat what Josh said. We need your feedback to prioritize. We have our ideas, we have our roadmap, but we are not building the product for us. We are building the product for you. And if we can exchange and share the fact that, our view is maybe not the ones you have, and we can adapt to match your better, then it's better for us and it's better for you.
Perfect. So I guess at this point, usually I, stop sharing the presentation. I show my screen, and then we'll go through the chat. We'll look for questions, and this is the more interactive part of the session.
Yeah, so let me start with a question from Greg because he got in there first. So he mentioned that in the KB article on Mac OS upgrades or erasing it, it mentions the API key and you copy a token, a base64 token from the administrator's token. The where you get that token is in the manage administrators assistant within the product. So if you go into assistants and manage administrators and look at any particular account, you'll see that there's a tab, a tab there for application tokens. That's the base64 there that we're talking about. Highly recommend, depending on what you're doing for this, that you create a user that's specific for a utilization. Right. So if it's if let's say that I was doing an integration with a ticketing system, for instance, and I wanted to use an API call to send data over to that external ticketing system. So we have a list of all the devices that are in FileWave, for instance. I'd most likely create an account like like Right Now. Right, I might create an account for Right Now, and then that way, that account has its own token. So if that's revoked or anything like that, it wouldn't impact anything other than that particular application.
Yeah, the thing that you can do even at 2 different levels. So you can create a specific account which will have only the permissions to do a limited set of changes on your system. And then the other granularity you have is you can create multiple tokens. So if you have one script that you deploy somewhere and another script you deploy somewhere else, you can create 2 different tokens. And if you know that for any reason that the script you deployed has been shared while it should not have been shared and could be used by someone you don't know, you can just revoke that specific token, which is invalidate that specific script and not another script. So you really have the complete granularity and all the options you want to manage that. That if you use the token, it's exactly as if someone would log in at FileWave with user password. So it's really impersonating the admin.
Or if you show your token on a YouTube video, as I'm doing today, obviously this token will be revoked right after this.
Poor Bob. The follow-up question in that from Greg, or at least the second part of the question, has to do with the Monterey upgrade itself. He's asking if that can be published to the kiosk so that folks could self-service on that rather than it being driven via a custom field.
And I believe that could, using the method that Sean has in the KB, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that requires that it use a custom field to drive it. Of course, the payload itself is going to be sizable, right? So when the person clicks on install, it's going to, of course, download, right? So that's a part of that process. But and a reboot would be in there as well. But I don't know that there's any reason that you couldn't do it driven through the kiosk as well. It likely means, of course, that you're going to make some changes to the payloads of the file sets.
Yeah, you may want to look at these KB articles for the method that Sean has been maintaining.
There's nothing to stop you deploying the installer first and not being part of the kiosk installer. So you could do it as a two-stage process. And so you could actually have like a smart group, for example, based on is the installer on the machine yet? And then when you know it is, then it can appear in kiosk. And then when the user activates it, all they're doing is activating the script rather than actually trying to then do the download and then waiting.
Well, that's a good point, Sean, and actually goes back to kind of some of the things that Tobias said at the start of his presentation. And the thing that I love most about FileWave is the incredible amount of flexibility in the product. We can pretty much do anything. You just have to think about how you might want to do it.
Okay. Is there another good question? I wasn't seeing the chat for the most of the...
Well, there is a good question, right? And I'll put you on the spot. Are there any plans to support other Linux platforms like Ubuntu?
Well, I don't know the answer for that. So,
well, I will tell you. I will tell you full
the answer.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that the full disclosure is we're right now we're not looking to add additional platforms, but we are looking internally to see what we're going to do that's away from CentOS, because obviously it's short-lived at this point. We've been looking very strongly at Alma Linux, and we kind of have an internal initiative and a team that's working on what we can do there. So that's most likely the direction we're going to go, but it's not written in stone yet.
See, I was looking at that question more like Linux clients in the field, like IoT devices and such. But I wasn't thinking about
Linux desktop.
Yeah, that may be the question, and if that's the question, then to be honest, no, that's not really something that we've had any kind of real push for.
But product board might be a good place for us to learn. You know, if somebody came to us and said, you know, oh, I have this environment with 10,000 Linux devices. Well, certainly 10,000 Linux devices need to be managed. So that's correct. I guess come to us and tell us.
So maybe one little secret there. I mean, nobody is listening to us and this video will not be posted on YouTube, but we already have a Linux client and some of you are already using it because that's shipped with our imaging solution. So the way we are currently using, we are currently having IVSs getting images from the server is just by using FileWave, because FileWave is great as getting files everywhere. So now the problem is that it's very limited to our imaging solution, and it's obviously not tested on anything else than our CentOS. And we know that unfortunately lots of flavors of Linux may behave differently. So we have to figure out which ones we could support if there is a need. And on the other hand, there is nothing to manage installing RPMs like you could install MSI or PKG. So there is something running, but it's very, very far from being a product that we can give you guys to manage Linux devices. But there is something.
Okay. And then
What else do we have? There were some discussions about the identifier, about the devices and conflicts.
Oh, and serial numbers.
Serial numbers.
Right.
The point is that if we look at it from an Apple perspective, it's already hardware based, because we just take the serial number from the device and we just do a checksum on it. So it has a specific format, but we are using serial number. So here it's really hardware based. On Windows, it's a little bit more complicated. There is no strict API to provide our reliable, consistent hardware ID. There is one, but it's not enforced on Microsoft side. And we had several customers who have, if you look at what we report, it just reports to be filled by OEM. That's the exact quote, which is sent by all devices as a serial number. So unfortunately, we cannot rely on that. So that's why we still have this computed based on hardware version for the ID, which is based on MAC address, on serial number reported, and so on. But yeah, it needs to be a combination of multiple ones. And we know that sometimes it's not enough to be completely unique. That said, we still use the name as an identifier in combination with this unique number for backward compatibility reason. That's something that was there on FileWave probably before, way before I joined, so more than 15 years ago, and which was quite nice. But yeah, that's something, if you want to change it, we will have to break compatibility. So we have already discussed a lot about how to do that. And we are still trying to find the best way to both to migrate both to something which is way more reliable than just the name, but which will not break completely the compatibility with the previous version of FileWave. So that's the blocking point for us right now. But we'll go there.
And I think I know the answer to this. I feel like I should, but I know PM that you know for sure. But what's the current method in 14.8 to update a DEP enrolled Apple TV device, you know, with tvOS? Isn't it the same as iPads where you can move them ahead with software update, or am I wrong on this?
I would expect that, yeah, it's the same. So there should be an OS update which would show up in FileWave. So either because the app is reporting that it requests the update, or with the kind of online offline catalog, GDMF from Apple. I know that we've worked on different issues related to software update and tvOS in 14.9. I don't have the list of the exact list of bug fixes we made for 14.9 with software update, but I remember that one of my developers worked with this. So that's very likely the answer could be just upgrade to 14.9. But yeah, if that doesn't work.
I guess, John, you know how to reach us in PS. So professional.services@filewave.com, or I think you know my email. So, you know, let me know if that for some reason is behaving the way that we say.
I've seen also some questions about some lag when, or sometimes some issues when renaming or changing the comment of some iOS devices. So we had, I think, 1 or 2 customer cases I've been working with. So there was one issue which we notified on our side on 14.8.0, where at some point we would have some issues to contact Apple APN system. There is a patch which is available. So if you still see the issue, I would expect either move to 14.9 or get the most recent patch. Support can help you there. And on the other side, we've notified together with Apple an issue which is unfortunately fixed only on the most recent version of iPadOS and iOS, which at some point the device will stop communicating with its MDM until you restart the device. And for this one, unfortunately, the only answer we have from Apple is that, yeah, we have to upgrade the device. So that's part of the issues which are slightly hard to investigate, because sometimes it could be a FileWave issue, even if we try to kill as many issues as we can and to provide as robust as possible FileWave version. And sometimes it's on Apple side, and for these ones, we have unfortunately no way to act except reporting the issue and working together with you and Apple to get it fixed as soon as possible.
And just to reveal a little bit about, how the sausage gets made as well, that communication is always a triangle with the Apple MDM framework. We're talking to Apple, Apple talks to device, device talks to us. So we do a lot to build reporting in, to do logging on all these different services and stuff. And when we run into a new issue, that's some issue that we haven't had develop a method it first. Capture that additional thing that maybe we weren't logging before. So there's a whole lot that goes into, trying to trap these things, and especially that it's a three-legged stool instead of just being direct communication like it is with the FileWave client. It does make it quite a bit more difficult.
Possibly another thing to mention here on this topic, which won't be necessary for maybe the person who originally mentioned this, because possibly not the issue in this case, but it is something that has come up. When we say it's a triangle, so it's from us to Apple, Apple to device, device to us, actually the device pulls that from Apple. And so there's a persistent connection between the device and Apple to actually basically it talks to Apple saying, have you got anything in my queue for me? The problem with that is that as the battery power goes down on your device, that persistence drops, and you could end up waiting quite some time before the device actually bothers to check in with Apple. They lower it because your battery's going down. They don't want to burn through your battery, so they don't want you to have bad experience. And so you then get this additional delay that occurs, which could be like 20 or 30 minutes maybe if the battery's really getting low, before the device actually picks up the APNS and then reacts upon it. Right. So again, it's a window that changes based on Apple's coding. And of course, we have no control over that either.
And, John's mentioning of, if iOS 16 fixes communications issues, right, maybe he can't go to that because of state testing, that they have to stay on a particular version. But I think we end up stuck a bit because Apple's response to us, even when we engage with Apple about an issue, is sometimes, well, it has to go to iOS 16. So that becomes our answer to the customer in a support ticket, right? Because Apple has let us know that iOS 16 is the way to go on fixing something.
So what I would suggest there is, first we need to make sure that it's not the issue we have identified with FileWave, and which, if the server is fixed, then that means that it's unfortunately the issue on the Apple device. And if it's an issue on Apple itself, then the usual way we have to do is that you, as an Apple customer, you have to open a ticket on their side. We, as an MDM, we open a ticket on our side. We link both tickets. They say that they need to have as much report as possible. And this will change eventually their way of fixing the issues. But the only thing we can do, unfortunately, is to report that we have mutual customers having the issue. But we can definitely help providing logs, helping you gathering logs. That's what we do when talking directly with Apple engineers.
I'm looking through for anything that we may not have. And if someone feels we missed anything, feel free to write it again, because
yeah, we're petering out a little bit there.
Just mentioned that Hi,
Nicholas. I see your message.
yes. Oh, sorry.
Hey. That's okay.
Yeah, for a long time I have asked FileWave and Apps Anywhere to implement the kiosk mode of Apps Anywhere to FileWave. It's in the normal circumstances that it's in the moment implemented with Jamf, and they implemented it that way that you have a web kiosk for software, which is managing the applications on the local client. So if there's a managed client, Jamf will be called to install the software, which is wanted by the user. It would be a nice idea for university, etc., to have bring your own devices and applications combined with clients which are university owned and bring your own device.
No, so I copied your message so that I could take a look at that, because I haven't looked at apps anywhere. But this fits into kind of that idea of, you know, putting in product board, you know, like, hey, this would be really great for this reason, and then that gets funneled to the right places. But I copied it so we have it too.
Yeah, okay. I've just often asked the question, but just to be.
And also I'll say, sometimes if you have a support case and you might mention to support, like, I'd really like this thing to be this way. It would be good to still think about submitting through product board, because that is sort of a different system that is specifically for voting on things and promoting ideas. And so it would be the most optimal place to put it.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Yeah. Let's see.
There is a question about ability to sign Apple profiles on the roadmap. I know that there is already a ticket for it, and if it's not visible in the roadmap, I'm sure that Tony will make sure that it shows there. The only question I had, because we discussed about it and how to put it in the priority, the one important information would be what would be your need exactly. Because if we deploy a profile with FileWave or any other MDM, the device is automatically accepting the profile because it's trusted by the MDM. So is it to export a signed profile so you can share the profile somewhere else? It's importing a signed profile and being able to remove the signature to modify the profile. So signing profile, it's easy, but it doesn't bring that much except the nice check mark. I know that in these days of Twitter and having the nice check marks, it's trendy these days, but that doesn't bring that much on the device itself, but it brings a lot on other things. So I see that you answered exporting and importing. So providing more use cases will bring some more material to the feature itself, and that's something that can raise the priority of a feature, definitely.
And so then, obviously product board, if you don't see it there, submit it there, and vote on it there. Let's see. I saw a lot of good ideas for names, and for ideas for training to go to Disney. Okay, here we are. For TeamViewer for macOS, what are my options, if any, to deploy TeamViewer with and without standard user screen recording allowance in your recipes? The current TCC profiles can't be uploaded to the server at the same time.
Yeah, that's correct. It's okay. Because so the script itself has been written to identify if the profile is installed first, and if it is, then it will then activate the software. We want to make sure that the profile is installed before the software, because the thing with TCC is that if the process of the software is already running, when the profile lands, then the profile doesn't actually impact it until the software process is restarted. So we're making sure that the profile lands first, and using a requirement script to look for that profile and say, if it's there, then fine, install the software. Now, obviously, we've tried to provide two different profiles to do the same thing based on the idea that you might want to do one or you might want to do the other. So therefore, both profiles have got the same identifier. And as you've noticed, if you try and put both on one server, they're going to complain because you can't have two with the same identifier. If you were to look at one and look at the other, you'll see there's almost no different. So you could just build one yourself, right? Which is just a copy of what we've done. So if you put one in, delete it, put the other in, and just compare the difference, right? Or you could export them as files, as mobile config files, and have a look inside them, or open them up with something else. If you have a look inside, you'll see what's in there, and you'll see there's very, very little difference. So you could just add that difference to your own profile, and then what you'd need to do is duplicate the file set that's actually doing the installer team viewer, and in there you're just going to need to change the line that's looking for the profile identifier, and basically change that to match the identifier of that new profile that you've just made. So you could just keep duplicating it and making others if you wanted. It's just we needed to identify the profile ID within the requirement script. And so therefore, both of them have got the same identifier because we don't know which of these two you would use. But you can just do it yourself. It's fine. Just edit the script, copy and paste. If you go in and edit the profile, the first page you'll hit with actually has the identifier of the profile, and you can highlight that text there, copy and paste it into your script.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Sean.
There was a question about disallowing screen recording. Unfortunately, the TCC profile only allows you to disable it. And since I think it was introduced with macOS 11, it only allows you to let a normal non-admin user to enable it. So that's something we cannot, it's not part of the MDM protocol. So there is no way to force screen recording. It's still Apple's way of managing privacy, and that's a user decision.
And that's why Sean ended up with this second profile, which allows a standard user, because that was sort of the best we could do with granting it, given Apple's restrictions.
But there are some things I'll mention on the, on the product enhancement side that could help with this type of thing. So we've had some requests for being able to use dependencies with profiles, etc. We're kind of working around that. We have some methods for working around that, but if that's the kind of thing that you'd like to see, please let us know. Some of the other things that we've kind of been kicking about is the ability to, not that it's directly related, but it's also about profiles, is the ability to duplicate a profile. We know a lot of you like to be able to do that when you have a restriction profile that's kind of, you have a lot of work to build a copy of it if you have to build it from scratch. So it might be nice to be able to duplicate one. There's all sorts of little things like that, the more feedback we get from you, the better. Pian is just sitting there, not doing a thing. He's waiting for folks to tell him what to do. So the more detail you can give us on these things, the better.
And when we discuss about this with Apple and the fact that we have several customers asking for being able to enable or to force screen recording, their answer is that they don't want to force that for a privacy reason, and their suggestion is to go with social way of handling that. For instance, okay, if you don't have screen recording enabled, then you don't get the software you are supposed to have, which may be a way to do it. Maybe not, because some students will be super happy to not have their testing or assessment software installed. But yeah, that's the way they answered.
Okay. Any questions that we may have missed, feel free to paste them in and we'll hit them now. Otherwise, we might be winding down.
I think there was a question about Catalina support. If we are, because 49 is starting with starting to drop Catalina support. The thing that Catalina is not supported anymore on Apple side, so for us it's super hard to support our software on an operating system which is not supported by the vendor at all. We haven't done anything to prevent a 49 client running on Catalina, but we haven't tested it at all. So we don't know if that works. It should work, but yeah, if that doesn't work, then there is very little chance that we can fix anything because neither us have tested it or Apple is still maintaining Catalina. So I would say your call, but yeah, you will not be able to open a support case if anything is not working there.
Just in general, I guess I'll chime in there because sometimes there are questions about what it means when we put things on our release notes and say, this is a supported version. And when it comes to the OSs, we do kind of an N-1 for our own product. So whatever the current version is, plus the previous version. And we're really doing the same thing on the support version for client OSs. Now, when we say supported, what we mean is we're actively testing against that. So our QA team, when they're doing regression testing in our PI, program increment process, they're testing actively against these particular versions. So as Josh is showing there, say we're saying, say Mac OS 12 and 13, et cetera, those are what we're testing against actively. And then there's kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is legacy stuff, which we know for sure that we're not supporting. We know there's things that are broken. So you can, for instance, if you're managing Windows 7, we know that we're not going to support anything. Well, support is even a funny word, but you can run a legacy version of our client on it and it should still report inventory into the system and ostensibly install faucets, but there's no real support for it. But you can't go beyond this version. But then there's a middle ground that is between these two things. So say an older version of Windows 10 that's not specifically on our list of supported doesn't mean it won't work, but it does mean that we don't actively test against it. Right. So there's kind of a middle ground of older OSs that that aren't technically old. If you want to put air quotes around them, they're not that old. It's just that we're not actively testing against them, but we still believe that they'll work. So it depends on the type of issue that comes up, but it's pretty rare that we have an issue with one of our clients that worked before, but then stop working on a version that was, it's unusual for that to happen. If it does happen, we'll treat it on a case-by-case basis, but it's exceptionally rare.
And there was a question, but I think maybe, Vanessa, maybe you mean that we can't push Windows images with hosted servers because you wrote on-prem. Because we specifically, so today, if you have an on-premise server, and you'd have an IVS server, you'd be able to do Windows images. If you're a hosted customer where we run your FileWave server for you, that's the situation where you can't really do Windows imaging. But earlier, Tony was mentioning where that was one of the things that we're looking to get going, right? Where there's been work on that front.
I see Marjorie asked a question there too about permissions. It's one of my favorite topics because it's, Fian's laughing because I have a cow every time we talk about permissions because I'm like, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. You can set permissions, Marjorie, on folders to prevent folks from being able to do that. So if we look at that idea of a field tech persona where, say, James works in one particular school or one particular office and you don't want James to be able to work with anything else, you can go through and set permissions. Where I say it's wrong is because it's kind of backwards. So we've got this whole story where we're looking at more role-based permissions. But if you show on that family group there the permissions, you'll see that you can set for any user permissions so that they can do stuff or not do stuff. So you can set it to read, write, edit, those types of things. So you could do things like make it so that somebody can't touch it because they won't even be able to see it if you wanted to, or if you want to make it read only, then they couldn't move it, for instance. The only real issue with that, those permissions work fine in the scenario that we're just looking at it. The only issue is that by default, anything new that you add, that user will have all permissions for that, and you have to restrict it. So instead of it defaulting to no permissions and then you give permissions, it defaults to all permissions and then you have to restrict them. So it depends on the way in which you're doing them, but yeah, you can actually do it. It's just a little bit of work. This is definitely something that we'd like to improve upon, though.
Okay. And deployment reports?
Yeah, Daniel asked a question about deployment reports. So I guess it depends on what you mean by that. So we've got one of the topics that we've been kicking around for a while is that we don't really have a concept of a deployment status itself. So when you look at a deployment, right, you can have multiple payloads that are in a deployment. Our status on those are the statuses on the payloads. So when you look at a device, for instance, that's in a deployment, and you look, you're not going to see a tab that shows deployments. It's going to show, do you have anything that's got something actually assigned to it?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Yeah. When you look at it here from either on the device info view, right, it's showing you a status and it actually says deployment, but that deployment is referring to the payloads that are assigned, not to deployments as an overarching thing. So when we talk about this one, we start getting into some semantics here about what is the status of a deployment. If I've got 15 apps in the deployment, what does it mean, right? So there's several things there that we're trying to figure out the best way of reporting. But for now, we've settled on it being at the payload level, because then you've got the granular detail that shows you, okay, exactly which things have worked and which things haven't.
And then I guess from the payload level, I guess folks would hope that you would be able to go here. Well, let me pick that
you have to find one that's assigned, but from a payload perspective, when you look at it, you see all the devices that have it assigned, right? So you see the two sides of it, right?
So this one does have one and it's in a warning state.
Correct.
I know why.
So usually, and it depends on the use case, right? If you're the central admin that's managing everything, you're probably much more interested in the payload view because it shows you overall status, right? And if you're the field tech kind of persona, if you're working in the field, you're most likely troubleshooting an individual device. So you're much more likely to go to the devices view, right? And see what that status is. And all of these, I'll mention, as I say this all the time and it annoys people, the information that we're looking at here is always based on the last inventory from the device. Right? And that inventory schedule depends on the type of device that we're talking about. So if it's a Windows device, for instance, right, that device will be reporting in once every 24 hours or on every, basically on every verify. So that on that schedule, it's reporting information in and whatever we're looking at inventory wise, it's based on that schedule. iPads are different depending on when we've run the command. So when you assign something new, you're going to get the list kind of updated fairly soon, but it also updates on a 24-hour basis, kind of in an automatic way too. So you just keep in mind that when you're looking, it doesn't mean that it just happened 5 seconds ago. It could potentially be done and not be reflecting it. But as a general overview, it's a really good view.
Some of the inventory scanners, that's how we name them, are not waiting for 24 hours to send. So for instance, if you hit model update, the scanner which reports the current model of the client will report the update as soon as possible. We have the same, for instance, for network scanner. So if you have a device which jumps from Ethernet to Wi-Fi, then we will report as soon as possible. So we try to not report exactly very quickly, because that means that if you have 10 or 20,000 devices reporting a change of your Wi-Fi within 5 minutes, then it will just kill your server. So we have a little bit of delay, but it's not always 24 hours. It really depends on what type of information.
The question about Microsoft conditional access and supporting compliance status. I don't have an answer on that, unless Tony, you do. I mean, except for product board, obviously. But that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's posted on our big board, because we do have this question come up from time to time. We'd like to do it. We've been waiting for some kind of tipping point on that one where a lot of folks want to do it. These things, the integration points like this are expensive for us. So we try to look for the things that make the most difference to the most folks. And this one comes up, but it is a long road to do that particular request. So if you've not put in, like if you're out there and you're also saying to yourself, what is FileWave support of conditional access for Microsoft or for the other platforms that have the same kind of concept, please put your feedback into product board on that, because the more folks that we know that you're interested in it, the much more likely it is that we'll do it.
Okay. Well, then I think I don't think we missed anything, and we're just about 10 minutes away from the end.
All right, super.
Okay. So last chance. If you had a thought that came to mind, post it in the chat. If 10 minutes from now we're not on this session anymore and something pops in your head, you know, think about if it's a support case or the Alliance forums, for instance, like is a great place to ask that thing, you know, or if it's submitting something to product board, because those are all possibilities for something you might think of 10 minutes from now.
And as our Scrum Masters would say internally, 3, 2, 1, okay.
So I will bring up this slide again for a second. And then we'll wrap up. And I don't know if Tobias, if you had anything or anybody else had any closing thoughts.
No, I hope this, I hope this was useful to you, our customers. Again, thanks for making the time. It's always a great time for me and I think for the team to, to basically exchange with you live and also show you what's going on and what our plans are. So look forward to the next one. I want to wish everyone in the US happy Thanksgiving next week. Have a great break, and and then have a great rest of the year. And then I'm looking forward to meet you all again in Q1.
All right, thanks so much for joining, everybody. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.